Good morning, everyone. My name is Danielle McNichol. I am General Counsel and Director for the Neumann University Center for Leadership. I want to thank you all for your attendance this morning. We are very grateful for the individuals that we have for this presentation today. A few quick housekeeping items that I'd like to share with you. For today's Identifying Abuse Amid Social Distancing, we have participants from New York, Delaware, Pennsylvania, and Maryland. We are very excited for the attendance that we have capped at about 425 people today. So we're very pleased to have everyone here. At the conclusion of this presentation, the slides will be emailed to everyone that participated in today's webinar. So just so that you know, all of the resources and information that you will be seeing throughout this presentation, this will be emailed to you for your use. This webinar is also being recorded. For those who can't be here today, you'll feel free to be able to go to www.nucenter4leadership.com and check out our resource page. You will actually be able to view the live webinar at that time as well, and also for future training that you might need. Certificates will be emailed to all of the participants later this week that you did participate in the webinar. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, please place your questions into chat. We will constantly be monitoring those, and we will be able to answer those for you either throughout the different portions of the presentation, but we will also be reserving for about 10 minutes or so at the end of the presentation. So we'll try to get to as many of the questions as we will be able. If we do not get to them during the presentation time, we will be happy to follow up with you as well. Feel free to email me, mcnichod, at Neumann, neumann.edu, and we will make sure that your questions are answered. At this time, as I mentioned to you, we are very honored to have Michelle Cooper. She's the Health Education Specialist for the Pennsylvania Coalition Against Domestic Violence. Michelle?
Hi. Thank you so much. So thank you for allowing us to be here today to share some of this information with you. And just a little background before I get started with my presentation. The Pennsylvania Coalition Against Domestic Violence is the pass-through funder for 60 of our member programs that provide domestic violence services throughout the Commonwealth. All of our counties are represented and have a program that's able to provide emergency shelter services, hotline, legal advocacy for victims and survivors of domestic violence. So I'm going to go ahead and get started, and my goal today is to just share some basic information about domestic violence, and then talk about specifically the COVID-19 situation and the impact that that's having on survivors, both here in the Commonwealth and nationwide, and really globally. So really quickly, just to kind of review the impact of domestic violence in the US, we know that 1 in 4 women and 1 in 9 men will experience some form of domestic violence in their lifetime. Obviously, this is based on disclosure, so we know that those numbers are likely much higher. Nationally, more than 20,000 calls to domestic violence hotlines are made each day. And generally speaking, domestic and intimate partner violence accounts for 15% of all violent crime. So we know that this is a prolific issue in general. And with COVID-19, we'll talk in a few slides about the specific danger and escalation risk during this time. But basically, we know that this is already a huge issue. And then with the COVID-19 situation, the isolation, we know that this is an issue that's only going to get worse as more people are isolated and experiencing economic distress and the things that can also exacerbate domestic violence. You can switch to the next slide. In Pennsylvania, 2,486 survivors on average are served in one day throughout the Commonwealth. And in 2018, 122 individuals died from domestic violence related incidents. We know that when it comes to domestic violence lethality, situations such as unemployment, increased substance abuse, stress in the household, and having a firearm readily available are all things that exponentially increase the risk of fatality. Also, the inability for somebody who is experiencing domestic violence to safely leave their situation. So you can see why we are already concerned about the potential risk for domestic violence escalation and fatality with COVID-19. You can switch to the next slide. So as I mentioned, the risk of escalation right now is high because of the fact that many people are obviously, basically trapped in the home with, people who may be escalating in abusive behavior. This doesn't necessarily have to be physical violence that's existed before. We know that domestic violence is much more than just physical violence. It's emotional and mental abuse, financial abuse. So it doesn't necessarily have to be simply the escalation of those lethality situations, but also financial abuse, people taking advantage of some of the stimulus that's been available and making it impossible for people who are experiencing abuse to even think about how they might have financial independence after the COVID-19 situation is over. Exit strategies are limited. What we might do normally, which is suggest a safety plan to get out of the house if a situation is escalating, those exit strategies are limited, and many people may not feel that they are able to leave the house because of the current stay-at-home restrictions. And then finally, typically secure locations that we might suggest survivors go to, like a hospital or courthouse, are currently difficult to access. So in this time, we know that it's already a very tense situation. There's a lot of isolation and risk factors. And the ways that we might typically suggest survivors have access to services are not as available as they used to be. The good news is that right now there are many ways that we can bridge those gaps. So even though we know that this is a situation that has the potential to escalate domestic violence situations, because of our ability to use technology, this can bridge many of those gaps. So while we are maybe not able to provide in-person case management in the hospital and in the courthouse the way that we used to, we can absolutely use technology like Zoom, even text messaging, to be able to provide safety planning and ongoing services to people who are experiencing domestic violence. The most important thing to remember is that domestic violence shelters are definitely considered essential and are still operating and able to assist individuals who are not safe in their home. One of the things in Pennsylvania that we're able to provide also is hotel. So if there are individuals who have been exposed to COVID-19 or who feel uncomfortable engaging in communal living at this time, we're still able to provide them with hotel stay so that no one needs to be stuck in a situation that's unsafe. We're also collaborating with our community partners now more than ever, including other resources that might be available through FEMA, through other public resources, and obviously through the economic stimulus that are now available to more people. Our programs and PCDV are able to provide technical assistance over the phone, through email, through text message, as a way to be able to help survivors and people experiencing domestic violence connect with the resources that are still available to them. And I do have a link here, which we'll be providing to everybody at the end of the presentation. But the Pennsylvania Coalition Against Domestic Violence has a COVID-19 resource page that is constantly updated with more resources and more information about how COVID-19 is impacting survivors and victims of domestic violence and the benefits and things that are available to them throughout the Commonwealth. Next slide, please. One of the most important things to understand is how you can help during this time, because we know that there's been so much across social media, across regular media about the escalation of domestic violence. We know that many people are really interested in how they can help people who may be experiencing domestic violence. And the most important thing that all of us can do is make information about domestic violence, including hotline services and support networks that are available, make them widely available to people in ways that you may not have before. Many of you who provide one-on-one medical assistance to individuals are familiar with doing a screening for intimate partner violence. It may not be safe right now to provide that because we can't guarantee the privacy of individuals that are doing telehealth in the home. So making sure that at the beginning of a meeting, you're able to provide, without having to verbally ask questions, hotline information, not just for domestic violence services, but for sexual assault services, suicide prevention hotline, child abuse hotlines, elder abuse hotlines. These are ways that we can make sure that individuals can access those services without having to disclose that they're experiencing any kind of abuse within the home. It's also very important to make sure you're following best practices for tech safety, especially with so many people working remotely. We need to remember that what we used to be able to talk about openly may not be as accessible to us now. So always making sure, even if it's before a one-on-one supervision, that we're asking somebody to please let us know if they need any help or if it's a safe time for us to have a conversation. And finally, please make sure that you have the opportunity to connect with your local domestic violence program for ongoing collaboration and support, including the Pennsylvania Coalition Against Domestic Violence. And the next page are just some resources that you can follow for more information on how to support domestic violence survivors during this time. And then the next slide is just contact information for me. And I'm happy to have anybody reach out to me directly for more information, training, technical assistance, and help getting connected with any of our member programs throughout the Commonwealth. Thank you.
Good morning. So I guess I will take it from here. Thank you, Michelle. I'd like to thank Danny McNichol and the Neumann University Center for Leadership. My name is Leslie Davila, and I am the director of the Office for Child and Youth Protection at the Archdiocese of Philadelphia. And I want to talk a little bit about my office for a second, moving to the next slide, and what we're here to talk about today. So who I am as the director, I've been a child and a victim advocate for over 20 years. I'm an educator. I'm a crisis responder. I've been doing this work, working with victim survivors and in prevention, specifically in my work with the Archdiocese of Philadelphia. We oversee the implementation of policies, procedures that ensure that children who are working, who are in our programs, who are being served or in our schools, in the different ministries are being protected. And so, it's important that I'm here today with you, especially during April, which is Child Abuse Prevention Month. And, during this time of social isolation and quarantining, children are especially vulnerable. We hear the messaging of stay safe and stay home, but what we know that home is not a safe place for everyone. And we just heard a little bit about that as related to domestic violence, and particularly also with children. It's not always a safe place for them to be. And so I want you to think about the information that I'm sharing with you, not just in whatever role that you have that may be working or volunteering with you, but also as a community member. What are we seeing and hearing, and how can we intervene for children everywhere? And so looking at some of the statistics, we know, and this is the recent publishing of an infographic that talks a little bit about national information, but statistically 1 in 10 children will be sexually abused before they turn 18. Think about what that looks like. More than 4 children die daily from child abuse. 2.9 million cases of child abuse and neglect reported yearly in the US. A report is happening every 10 seconds. What we've seen during this national pandemic right now is that, first of all, child protective services are available, are working. Those victim advocates are working. The hotlines are available. So right off the bat, I want to, make sure that everybody knows that those adults who are interveners are available to help and to intervene and to offer guidance. We have seen, though, a drop, reported drop in calls to Child Protective Services. Now, any other day you might think, well, that's great. That means that there's less child abuse, but unfortunately, that's not the case. The reality is that most reports to Childline in Pennsylvania or to the Child and Youth Protective Services in other states happens because those mandated reporters, those adults, like many of you in the virtual world right now, are those adults who have to intervene by law on behalf of a child if you suspect abuse or you receive a disclosure of abuse. And unfortunately, we're living in a situation where many of those adults are not coming into contact with children. But there are still opportunities to come into contact with children and make those interventions happen. So harassment's not stopping, abuse isn't stopping, trauma isn't stopping, victimization isn't stopping during this time. So it's important for us to remember our roles as those interveners, and also just our role as a member of society who can help and act on behalf of children who may not be safe. Children are at a higher risk of victimization always, and especially during this time. So looking at the next slide, really go over this really quickly. The types of abuse that we're talking about are physical abuse, sexual exploitation, and neglect. So I don't want anybody to forget about the neglect part of it too. There may, whether it's because parents may be beyond their means right now, they may be stretched thin and not able to handle the situation themselves. We want to make sure that we're offering services to support families as a whole to try to minimize any stressors on them that may result in abuse, neglect, etc. So widespread social distancing right now means that child abuse and neglect can increase. There are incidents that we may see that, so we have to be watchful, again, of those children that we're interacting with, but also those that are in the community. If we're not seeing them, we're not hearing from them, is there a way that we can, do some outreach? We might see signs and symptoms and indicators, and looking to the next slide, the next few slides, just a kind of a review of some of the things that you probably have heard and learned about if you've had to take mandated reporter training. I know in Pennsylvania, educators are required to take training around identifying abuse. So, even if you're living in a virtual world, even, think about, are you using Google Classrooms? Are you using Zoom? Or other types of virtual classroom situations? What are you seeing? Are you seeing physical signs of abuse? Moving forward to the next slide, are you seeing, these indicators where there's changes in behavior? Are students withdrawn? Students who are always participating are no longer participating? Are their grades being challenged, lowering? Now, what we're seeing too, unfortunately, it's been reported by many school districts around Pennsylvania. There's a decrease, about 15 to 20, 25% of students since we moved into this virtual online classroom and virtual learning have not handed in assignments, have not been responsive to any outreach, and their families as well. I don't mean to indicate that that may be a sign of abuse, but it's something that maybe can be an indication that that family might need some further outreach. So what are you, as an educator, if you're an educator, as a school counselor, as a school district, doing to reach out to those families that are not engaging, not just from the academic perspective, to make sure that they're learning and they're getting the education they need, but also to support that family and to ensure that there's abuse that's not happening. Moving forward again to the next slide, again, so just continuing when we see these are these signs, warning signs, indicators that we talk about. How can we see these in a virtual world? What communications are happening that you may be privy to? I know oftentimes we see a lot of communication back and forth in social media, things come to our attention. I want to remind everyone that if you're working, you're volunteering with children, you have responsibility for, you are a mandated reporter, whether you're a school employee or you're working in another form, your school counselor. These are all individuals who are mandated reporters. We are all mandated reporters, and your responsibility as a mandated reporter doesn't stop because the child is not physically in front of you. So moving forward to the next slide, again, just keeping things in mind about sexual exploitation and sexual abuse. And I want to talk about sexual exploitation in a second in further detail. But again, some warning signs, things to look for. Are they, suicide attempts, suicide ideations? All of these things are these warning signs to look for. in person, obviously, but even in any interactions that you're having, whatever shape, way they are. If you're having electronic communications, make sure that they're appropriate, make sure that they're, encourage students to be mindful of what they're sharing. I think there's a great opportunity too to educate our students and our youth on how they're interacting with each other and with anyone during this time. The next slide, next two slides, I'll go really quickly again. Warning signs of mental injury, depression, self-mutilation, antisocial behavior. These are all just warning signs to be aware of generally. And again, just because we're in a virtual world doesn't mean there's things that you may not see. And the next slide, looking at warning signs of serious neglect. Think about the first one, frequently absent from school. Was this child and this student and this family always engaged, and they no longer are? Again, that might be an indicator that that family needs extra support, not necessarily that there's abuse. Maybe there's a technology issue. They don't have access to technology, but any way to keep connected to students is going to be important. So let's talk about your role again. And I started mentioning that already, but the next slide that talks about your role. If you're a teacher, administrator, staff who work with volunteers, you're a mandated reporter. You have close contact with children, whether it's virtually or in person, and it gives you that opportunity, again, to see any signs, indicators. If you're sitting in your virtual classroom, you're in essence getting a look into a window into that household. And is there something that you're seeing, or you're hearing, or that you believe that student is experiencing that causes concern? At the end of the day, the important thing is to make the report. Just make the report to the Child Youth Protection Services, let them intervene. You're not, it's not a personal thing. You're letting the experts take the responsibility for making a decision on what the next steps need to be. You have an opportunity to advocate for children. You are, you're able to be that person for them, think about who's not seeing that child anymore. They're not going to doctors. They're not going to dentists during this time. They're not going to after school programs. There's very limited contact with students during this time. So we want to, again, you're there and you have that obligation to report. Moving to the next slide. So what do you do? I talked a little bit about the indicators, whether or not you believe you have a suspicion of abuse or you receive a disclosure, and I'll talk about that in a second. If you have a suspicion of abuse, report it to your child and youth services. You can continue to communicate, and it's going to be important, communicate with that student, also communicating with parents. Part of what we do locally in the Archdiocese of Philadelphia around this time is a prevention education with students. Do you have that would normally be part of your curriculum? Can you continue to do that and mention those abuse prevention important messages with them? Making sure that they understand that, having that connection and that communication with students is going to be key, because they need to know that there are adults in this world who are still looking out for them, even if they feel isolated and alone and are in fear and are being abused, that there are other people that they can reach out to. Now, the responsibility is ours as adults. I want to make sure that children know that we're here for them, but at the end of the day, it's our responsibility as adults to carry that burden and to protect them. So we want that message to be clear. It's our responsibility. We should, reach out to parents and caregivers and offer support. We should reach out to maybe the school mental health professionals that can provide further guidance. If you do have a student who all of a sudden's grades are changing or hasn't been submitting any documentation or anything, any work, how can you do outreach? And are there resources within your school districts, within your community to be able to do that? We see an increase in bullying and cyberbullying during this time. So encouraging students to be upstanders as well, to do the right thing, to let someone know if there's harm that's coming to a peer. They will disclose to peers. So you can incorporate them and encourage them to be part of that. So what do you do if a student discloses? The next slide just kind of gives us a little thing to think about there. So, it's always important to create a safe space for students, have them understand that you're there for them, make sure to be supportive, always reassure them that it's not their fault. If they do tell you that they have experienced abuse, it's not their fault. It's never their fault. Thank them for telling you. And also be careful with your reaction to ensure that if you have a strong negative reaction, they may interpret that as an opportunity to not talk about this anymore and not to tell anybody anymore. Tell them you believe them. Encouraging, strong words. And again, at the beginning of all this, you have to report and make sure they understand that you have to report any abuse that, or any, anything that you have to do at abuse, so that they understand and that relationship is still there. You have to report. Moving on to the next slide, what we've been seeing. So I'm going to talk about a couple things that we've been seeing, in addition to seeing a decrease in reporting, seeing a decrease we're seeing a decrease in reporting. Some of the increases that we've been seeing, again, are cyberbullying. Students bullying each other using harmful words. Think about what students are doing right now. They are online, not just in, the classrooms, but they're spending a lot of time on social media accounts. And, it's important to encourage them to not post too much personal information, to things that they would be considered private and they don't want to share. We see a lot of information on TikTok. I don't know how many of you are following the videos and posting that information. They are not just, and they're being harassed, not just by peers, but others, because they are on these social media accounts that give them, that give others an access to them nationally. So, we see that increased use. We also see an increase in those who are targeting children through technology. And looking at our next slide, technology facilitated victimization and sexual exploitation. There are predators who are sitting online looking for opportunities to access children, to groom children. They are soliciting sexual images from children and youth. They're increasing their sexual content that they're putting out there that are targeting children and youth, soliciting those photos from them. And we're also seeing Zoom bombing. And so you probably have heard about, people who are kind of hacking into Zoom accounts, but people are hacking into Zoom accounts, Google Classroom, posting negative images, sexually explicit images, more in Zoom than in Google Classroom. But these are all victimization that we're seeing increasing right now. And so if that happens to you, where you're in a virtual setting, you should definitely report that to law enforcement to let them know what's been going on. So the last slide, last two slides, one is resources. Again, just put some quick links up here. The first, Child and Youth Protection, is the website for my organization. We have information about identifying abuse, information for parents that you can share with them. Feel free to share with them about how to talk to their children, how to report. Keep Kids Safe is the website in Pennsylvania, which is the reporting. You can report electronically, as well as the number to report is on that website. The National Sexual Violence Resource Center, I wanted to highlight that as well. Know that there's many people from different states on this webinar right now. That they have a page that specifically talks about COVID-19 resources, but in the categories for those who experience domestic violence, sexual violence, child sexual abuse, those with disabilities. So they have a lot of resources there. And stopbullying.gov, again, talks more about what we're seeing now with bullying. So the last slide is just my contact information. Feel free, regardless of where you are in the country, to reach out to me if you have any questions, if I can provide you any guidance or assistance or connections into your neck of the woods. And lastly, just wanted to remind you that you are somebody to speak up for children. So I ask you to use your voice, whether it's children in your official role or children in your community, to help protect them.
Thank you
for
so
your time.
much. Thank you for your information and really insightful comments of what's going on right now. At this time, I would like to introduce Jennifer Storm. And Jennifer Storm is the victim advocate for the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Jennifer, we're very pleased to have you. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for hosting this really important. I want to thank Michelle and Leslie for some really great resources and content. So I'm going to focus a little bit more on my office and specifically victims' rights broadly, and then get into a little bit of what OVA, specifically the Office of Victim Advocate, does. So we were formed in 1995, actually during a special session on crime here in Pennsylvania. It actually was probably the first wave of criminal justice reform. When we think about criminal justice reform in today's timeline, we're really talking more about reform as it relates to the offender and the system's response to the offender. But really, criminal justice reform started back in the 90s, and it started as a response to a lack of victim involvement and a lack of meaningful victim rights. And so in Pennsylvania, the response was to create multiple offices, one of those offices being the Office of Victim Advocate. You can go to the next slide. And one of the unique things that they did in this creation, and you might want to click it one more time to get my photo zooms in, sorry about that. One of the unique things that Pennsylvania did is that they created an actual statutory victim advocate. So by statute, my position exists. It's independent of any other governmental entity. So I'm not a part of the cabinet, but I am an independent entity and agency in the Commonwealth. And so this is unique because it really allows for the victim advocate to truly advocate on behalf of crime victims. And so it's a nominated term. So you are nominated by the governor, and then you have to be confirmed by the Senate, and it's a 6-year term. So I am the third victim advocate to hold this position since the 90s in Pennsylvania. My predecessors were Mary Achilles and then Carol Lavery. And so I have just completed my first full term, and I am awaiting Senate confirmation for my second term. The 6-year appointment is to try to straddle political parties, to try to keep it as bipartisan as possible. As we know, victimization impacts everyone. So some of the mandates that my position has and then what my office does there's overlap, but there's also some unique nuances. So my position specifically is responsible for representing the interests of all crime victims in the Commonwealth. So it's a pretty heavy lift. And the way that the victim advocate does that is by statute, I sit on every conceivable committee, task force, any table where criminal justice, juvenile justice, or victims' issues should be represented. My office or myself are there. And we're there to really bring forth best practices, current trends, the needs of victims, but also to make sure that victims' rights are always there. They're always being discussed. I always say if we're not at the table, we're on the table, and that's a dangerous place. Victims need to be infused in every single discussion that happens within our criminal and civil justice processes. You'd be hard-pressed to find a change, whether it's legislatively or policy-wise, that impacts our overall justice system that doesn't also somehow impact the victim or a potential victim in that case. So always important to have victim services at the table. And that was the point of this position. What we also do more kind of agency-wise is we're responsible, and we can go to the next slide. We're responsible for the post-sentencing notifications that victims receive. So OVA is an organization. We have roughly 30 staff right now. So we're one of the smaller Commonwealth agencies. When I started, we had 16 staff, so we were really small. We serve over 60,000 crime victims, survivors, and family members every day with a myriad of notifications and services, some of which I'm going to be able to touch on today, but I'm not going to be able to get to the breadth of it. So if we click that button one more time, my website will pop up. Please visit ova.pa.gov. We have a wealth of resources and services. But our agency is made up of about 30 individuals, and they're broken down by specific positions, policy directors, directors of victim services. The bulk of our staff are going to be those victim assistance coordinators. We're fortunate that we have some satellite offices across the Commonwealth. We have partnerships with the Philadelphia District Attorney's Office, with the Allegheny Crime Victims Center, with the Office of Attorney General in Pennsylvania. So we are where we need to be to make sure geographically we're representing the interests of victims. We started pandemic planning in February because we kind of saw this wave, and we're very tied into what is PEMA in Pennsylvania, which is our Pennsylvania Emergency Management Agency. And we started looking at what would a pandemic plan for OVA look like? What are those services that we must stand up to make sure that victims are in fact receiving their services and their rights? And how would we operate if we had to social distance, if we had to, keep our staff separate? And so fortunately, we were ready. And so as soon as the governor issued the emergency proclamation and kind of sent all of us home, if you will, we were able to stand up our operations immediately. You can click to the next slide. So one of the things that we want to make really clear is that victim services are essential services. We are operational, not just in Pennsylvania, all over the country. We haven't just stopped working because of COVID-19. If anything, we've ramped up our services in some areas, and we've modified, and we've pivoted towards this new normal of delivering services like this. So there's counseling services that are being delivered this way. There are child therapy services that are being delivered this way. We're using technology to the best of our benefit. And as you heard Leslie talk a little bit, there's also some downsides to that too. One of the messages we want to get really clear for you is that there are trained, professional, accredited helpers available. And we're asking you to find the right helpers. And how you can do that is by going to, specifically in Pennsylvania, the resources that we have listed, that all of us have provided. Certainly, this is a time where everyone really wants to help, right? People are locked in at home. They're trying to figure out what their specialty is. A lot of people are making masks. A lot of folks are taking to social media and expressing their fears about domestic violence victims being sheltered in home with their abuser, child abuse victims. And they are incredibly well-intentioned individuals who are trying to help. Our concern is we want to make sure that in that extension of help, we don't see unintended consequences of harm. We want you to know who the trained, accredited professionals are. Those that are funded, that are monitored, that have standards of care that are trauma informed, so that when you make a referral, you can make that referral with confidence. And you know that that person, that family, that victim, that child is going to an individual who is trained in what they're doing. So we're asking you to be a little mindful of some of the things popping up on social media and some of the resources that might be new, that could be kind of coming out of individuals' homes or churches or basements. While they are well-intended, we want to make sure that you get to the right place. Certainly when it comes to victims' rights and victim services in Pennsylvania, my office is available. Our phone lines, our hotlines are still open. Staff are on those calls every day, all day. Our emails, we are responding to emails in real time. My staff are operational. We have 5 people on site at our physical location, and the rest of us are teleworking from home like I am today. PCAR, PCADV, same. Their hotlines are staffed, they're available, accessible 24/7. So if you have a question about domestic violence, PCADV is going to be your expert in that field. If you have a question about the Pennsylvania, about sexual assault and Pennsylvania rape crisis, PCAR is going to be your expert there. They're going to be your resource. Certainly if you're struggling, if you have individuals that are struggling with mental health, we've got a great crisis text line in Pennsylvania, 741-741. And then finally, Childline. And I know Leslie touched on this too. If you suspect child abuse in any way, Childline is still there. You can still make a report. That report will still be investigated. We are all responsible for not only ourselves, but making sure the protection of others. You as educators, obviously, and I love the quote that Leslie mentioned about, you're still a mandated reporter even if the child's not directly in front of you. We want to make sure, though, you're getting to the right resources. So please use those lines. Every single one of these phone lines is confidential by law, meaning it's privileged. Your communications cannot be shared, and it's also free. So please make use of these resources. Then click to the next one. So in general, and I kind of made this really generic, so this doesn't just speak to Pennsylvania. I know we've got New York, we've got Maryland, we've got some other states on the line. All victims across the country have rights. Now, those rights look different depending upon the jurisdiction you're in. Some of you have constitutional rights, like Maryland. Some of you in Pennsylvania, like us, we passed constitutional rights, which you're going to hear about, but we still have statutory rights. And so all victims of crime at the federal level, state, and local have the right to be informed, have the right to be present. And here's where we've really pivoted. A lot of courts are now using virtual alternatives to enable that presence. And in fact, there have been amicus briefs and court filings and mandates saying that if you are a court and you're going to operate, you must provide an alternative for that victim or that family member to attend a hearing, a sentencing, any of those events, court events that victim would have a right. You've got to provide a virtual opportunity for them to do that. And so we've been doing that. One of my staff attended a sentencing event with a victim virtually the other day. Wasn't perfect, but it was presence, and it upheld that victim's right to be there. They have the right to be heard. So when we're talking about sentencing, there's certain times, demarcations within the continuum of the justice system where victims actually have a right to be heard. It's usually post-conviction, post-sentencing, but they still have that right. So the reason my staff person was at that sentencing is because that victim at that time had a right to address the court. And that victim was able to facilitate that right using a technology like we are today. They have the right to be notified. If there is a court event happening where their offender is involved, that victim, that family member, they have a right to be notified of that. Is there a court event being scheduled? If so, that victim should be notified and in advance so that they can plan and properly attend. Really important, and a lot of what we're talking about today is victims have the right to have their safety considered. And where this is really important is in bail hearings and in prison and parole and pardons. And we're going to talk a little bit about this because nationally, there have been a lot of prison releases that have happened, some of them by court order, some of them by judicial discretion. There have been a lot of court filings. There's been a lot of lawsuits filed. And so it's been a real hot topic, and every jurisdiction is dealing with it differently. And I'm going to talk a little bit later on about how Pennsylvania at the state level specifically is dealing with that. But fundamentally, the victim's right to safety must be considered in those practices and those policies. And finally, the courts are still open, albeit limitedly. But if you are a person or you know a person who needs a protection from abuse order, or if it's a restraining order in other jurisdictions, an emergency custody order, those courts, those orders, those services are still accessible. So please reach out to your local courts and find out how those victims can access those. And more importantly, reach out to victim services, because then victim service advocates can provide the appropriate accompaniment. So let's move on to the next one. We're going to hear a little bit more about this with Jen Riley, but quickly, in Pennsylvania, if you are a victim and you feel that your right has been violated, my office, the Office of Victim Advocate, is charged with what we call our compliance department, meaning you can file, if you go onto our website and go under Crime Victims' Rights, you'll see a form that you can fill out that'll essentially walk you through what right you felt was violated, who in the system violated that right, and then we do our best to research, to remedy, to facilitate education on your behalf or on the victim's behalf. Now in Pennsylvania, it's a little challenging because we don't have constitutional victims' rights. We passed the law, and you'll again hear about this with Jen, and overwhelmingly the voters voted for it. We had 1.7 million voters vote for it, but it's being held up in a court challenge right now. So technically there isn't enforcement, legal enforcement of a victim's right, which is pretty shocking when you think about having a legal right and not being able to enforce that right. Kind of feels like you don't really have a right. And so for victims, that's been the frustration for decades in Pennsylvania, and we're really trying to remedy that. Our stopgap solution, though, in the meantime, is to have this compliance department through my office. Mainly what we're able to do is educate the entity that might have violated that right. Maybe it was a district attorney that just didn't confer with the victim. Maybe it was a victim service agency that wasn't able to notify that victim. Maybe it was the Department of Corrections who released an inmate and never made that notification. We're able to reach out to those entities mainly as a reminder and then to fully educate them. I want to highlight a resource for you, especially if you're an attorney or you're looking for some kind of draft legislation or draft response to the court. NCVLI, the National Crime Victim Law Institute, is a phenomenal nonprofit organization out of Portland, Oregon. I'm biased. I sit on their board. They provide free and confidential legal resources and assistance. And one of the key resources that I utilize from them a lot is they have sample letters, sample court briefings, sample templates that you can kind of take and just plug and play for your own purposes. So you don't have to be an attorney or hire an attorney. You can really use their legal expertise. They've done some phenomenal petitioning on behalf of victims in light of COVID. And if you go to that link there, you'll be able to access some of those resources. You can get to the next slide. So in Pennsylvania specifically, and I won't focus on this too much, but I wanted you to know what the rights were and what they look like. We facilitate victims' post-sentencing rights. So post-sentencing for us at the state level means anyone that's going to be under the jurisdiction of the Department of Corrections or the Board of Probation and Parole, and then also any of those victims who have offenders identified as sexually violent predators. So we partner with the Pennsylvania State Police. We make all the notifications and facilitate all the rights for victims in these times. All states have this. So Pennsylvania is not unique, right? So if you're in Maryland, contact your Department of Corrections, your Board of Parole. If you're in New York, same. I work very closely with Janet, who facilitates victims' rights in New York. She's phenomenal. They provide these services. These are national services. And really the importance of making sure that victims have rights and input, even once the offender is sentenced. We can go to the next slide. So why is that important? When you think about the continuum of the justice process, right? Crime is committed, victim, walks through that trauma and that experience. If someone's apprehended, they go through the court process. All of that is happening with local victim services. But once an offender is sentenced and received by a state Department of Corrections or by supervision with the state probation and parole, then those rights divert to our office. And what's important is that victims know that they have rights while the offender is incarcerated, and then most certainly when and if that person is being considered for release. Safety is a huge aspect of this. Victims want to know where their offender is. They want to know if the offender is being considered for release. They want to know the conduct of that offender while they were under supervision or incarceration. And they want to make sure that they can keep themselves and their families safe when and if that person is released. So we provide all of those resources. And again, they are voluntary, they're confidential, and they are free. So we'll go to the next slide. So in a normal world, this would be the timeline of our notifications. And I put this up because I think it's important for people to understand the length of time and the amount of work that goes into making sure victims' rights are honored. In Pennsylvania, every single person is sentenced to a minimum date and a maximum date, right? So maybe you hear about an individual, well, they got 20 to 40. So 20 is going to be their min date, 40 is going to be their max date. In Pennsylvania, and this is Pennsylvania specific, every other state's different, at that minimum date, that offender will be eligible for review and potential release, regardless of conduct, regardless of what has happened. That's how we operate in Pennsylvania. So for us, that means we have a whole lot of work that we have to do leading up to that minimum sentence date so that the victim is informed, empowered, acknowledged, and if they want to be, engaged. And so we actually start reaching out to our victims 9 months prior to an offender's minimum date. That gives us the time to prepare them, to inform them, to help them feel empowered, to help them gather the information that they need to present to a body, to address safety concerns, to maybe address behavior that's happened while the person's been incarcerated, to address things that maybe aren't going to be in the court dockets that your normal entities like the Department of Corrections and the Board of Parole are going to be looking at. Victims and family members bring a lot to the table that doesn't always necessarily rise to the level of the trial court, the appellate courts, or any other criminal justice entity. So it's not going to be on paper in a file. It's very important that victims have the right to speak to those decision makers. And it's a very small part of a large decision-making process, but victims need to be a part of that decision-making process. So because of that, we start 9 months in advance. So the good thing with that is that we are looking at cases and docketing cases and bringing forth input really early. So right now, as we sit in this kind of pandemic place and we're all sitting at home, we're still in good shape because we are still working months and months in advance. So at this point, we haven't hit a place where we haven't been able to facilitate a victim's right, or we've had to expedite something because we're really working pretty far in advance. You can go ahead and go to the next slide. So what does input for a crime victim or a family member look like? It looks like it can be verbally, right? So someone can call our office and verbally tell one of my staff what they want the board to know when the board is looking at releasing that person. Our staff will type that up, submit it to the board. They can submit something themselves in writing. They can submit a presentation. We have videos, we have PowerPoints, we have photo presentations that individuals provide. Anything that they can get to us, we will upload that into the decision-making process and we'll send it to the decision makers. And then finally, they can actually physically come to our office and meet with decision makers. And that was a new law that was passed in Pennsylvania in 2012. And it was called in-person testimony. So right now that is on pause and we're providing creative alternatives, but we're about to ramp up in-person testimony again in June. And we're looking at being creative and pivoting towards the realities of COVID-19. We're going to be regionalizing that. We're going to be traveling to other locations and traveling to the survivors and the victims as opposed to having them travel to us. But what is input? It should include background information, the details of the crime, the emotional impact of that crime, the physical impact, the financial impact. Most importantly, though, what are their safety concerns? What are their requirements if and when that person is released? We can go ahead and shift to the next slide. What's really important to understand is that the majority of inmates who are sentenced are going to be released back into the community. So those victims and those family members have legitimate rights and concerns. So legislatively, one of the unique roles that I have legislatively is I have the right to petition the parole board on behalf of that victim. So I have the right to say, if a victim says, okay, well, I'm okay with them being released, but I'm scared about them being in my direct community. Could they be in a different county? Or if I live in Philadelphia, I'm in South Central. Can they be, can they just not be in South Central? Or I work in Center City. Is there any way that they can report elsewhere? And so we can do things like petition the board for geographical restrictions, for GPS monitoring, certainly for the denial of parole if the victim is adamantly just does not want that person to be released. But really, truly, more realistically, it's about figuring out those conditions with which that victim can feel safe if and when that person does get released into the community, and we have the ability to petition. Payment of restitution is huge, right? That's that one financial remedy that attempts to make a crime victim somewhat whole in the aftermath of a crime. Right now, we're supporting legislation in Pennsylvania, and I would imagine other states are doing this, where we're putting a pause on payment of fines, costs, and restitution due to the financial challenges that COVID has presented. But once the stay-at-home orders are lifted and folks can get back to work, those fines, costs, and restitution will be required to be paid back. So just like any other creditor, we're giving some leverage, but we're also being realistic that these are important to people, and some victims rely on that chat. We can go to the next slide. One of the programs I do want to highlight, and I mentioned we have a myriad of programs, so please visit our website, but what's germane to the conversation that we're having today is we facilitate a program called the Address Confidentiality Program. Again, a national program that was legislatively passed in, I believe, all 50 states. I'm pretty sure everyone has this. What it does is it provides an alternative address for a victim of domestic violence, sexual assault, stalking, human trafficking. If someone is trying to escape a violent situation and they are in the process of relocating, we're able to keep their relocated address confidential. And how we do this is at OVA, we will facilitate all the processing of their mail. We'll give them an alternative address. By law, that alternative address has to be accepted across the Commonwealth. So we get actually like a license, if you will, an identification made at PennDOT. We give that to the crime survivor, and they use that. They can use it to vote. They can use it to register for utilities, to get a lease. They can use it for all of the normal business that they would have to go through on a normal day, but none of it reveals their actual address. It all goes to a P.O. box that we at OVA maintain. And then we receive their mail and we distribute it out to their actual physical address. It's one way to keep a victim's digital footprint down, to keep them safe. We know that offenders are savvy and they have tactics that they can use. Tracking down victims is one of those tactics that is frequently used. So the less that we can, the more we can remove a victim's footprint off of, online Google searches, address searches, the safer they're going to be. So we do have that program. That program is still operational, obviously, and up and running. Next slide. So finally, this is our website. Again, please visit the website. If you have any questions for OVA, for our staff, that is our general email address. We will respond within minutes to your request, to your question, to your query. We do have an e-newsletter that we put out. We put out current events, activities that we might be doing, like we just got done with Crime Victims' Rights Week. We're in the middle of Sexual Assault Awareness Month, Child Abuse Prevention Month, all kinds of great things happening. But also we're going to give you legislative alerts when there are those important pieces of legislation that are popping up and let you know about those. That is our 800 number. Please call us. Like I said, our staff are there. And if there's anything I can impart on you today, is that you have the ability to be a seed planner. We don't expect you to do all the things that these presentations have shown you. What we would love to be able to provide for you is who the helpers are. Find those helpers, find the right helpers, plant those seeds, and then hope that that individual that you're concerned about is going to be able to get the assistance and the help that they need. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much, Jennifer, for all of that very valuable information. We can't thank you and your staff enough for all of the advocacy that you do for everyone throughout the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. So thank you for those valuable resources and, again, for everything that you do. And at this time, then I would like to introduce to you Jennifer Riley, who's the Pennsylvania State Director for Marcy's Law for All. And a reminder to everyone before Jennifer starts to make sure to include any questions that you may have in the chat or the Q&A sections. I have a few, and we will answer those probably a little bit past 11 o'clock, but we just wanted to let folks know and remind them if they'd like to get their questions in that they should do so now. And at this time, Jennifer Riley. Thanks again, Jennifer.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. So really quickly, I just wanted to give a quick overview of Marcy's Law, and to kind of put it in perspective, I wanted to tell you who Marcy was. So who is Marcy? Who is this initiative named after? So Marcy was a college student back in the 1980s who was brutally stalked and murdered by an ex-boyfriend. And a week after her death, her brother and mother went to go visit her grave. And then right afterwards, they went to the grocery store to pick up a few things. And at the grocery store, they ran face to face into the accused murderer. They had not been notified of his release. And so that kind of was the moment that Marcy's Law was born. So in a nutshell, next slide, please. And we can even move on to the third slide. So in a nutshell, Marcy's Law seeks to amend state constitutions. It's a national effort, state constitutions, to include those specific rights for crime victims. So kind of what Jennifer Storm was talking about, we are taking those statutory rights that we have here in Pennsylvania and elevating them to constitutional status. And the reason for that is, next slide, please. Without a constitutionality of crime victims' rights, there is no recourse for a victim if their right is violated. So in the case of Marcy, Marcy's brother and mother could not do anything about it. So if a victim is not notified of a court proceeding, there's nothing they can do. If they're not able to speak or they're not able to be heard during sentencing, there's nothing a crime victim can currently do about it. So I'd like to just say here, next slide please, that here in Pennsylvania, we have a robust effort for Marcy's Law. Now, in some of the neighboring states, and I know some of you are residents of Maryland and Delaware and New Jersey. So New Jersey has constitutional rights for crime victims, and so does Maryland. Delaware does not. But the interesting thing that we want to note, next slide please, is that not all constitutional rights are the same, right? So I know there's been talk about Marcy's Law going into New Jersey to strengthen those constitutional rights for crime victims. But here in Pennsylvania, you can see the legislative process. So we needed to get Marcy's Law passed in 2 consecutive legislative sessions, and you can see the outcome here. But primarily, I wanted to just note with this that it was a bipartisan effort. So this is not Marcy's Law is not a Republican or Democrat issue. It's a human issue. It's a civil rights issue. It's making sure that that rights for crime victims can be upheld through constitutionality. Next slide, please. So here in Pennsylvania, next slide, please, we had to go through a voter referendum. So what you can see on the screen here is the ballot question that, that voters here in Pennsylvania saw on the ballot this past November. And the results of that, next slide please, is 74% of Pennsylvanians voted in affirmative to elevate crime victims' rights to our state constitution. Next slide please. So the next slide. So the Pennsylvania version of Marcy's Law, these are the rights that it includes. And you can see here, this is pretty comprehensive as far as what the national standards are for crime victims' rights. So all of these things would be risen to a constitutional level, which would be able to give crime victims the last right, which is almost one of the most important ones, the right to standing, which means the right, obviously, to assert your right, the victim's right in a court of law. So without that, again, there's no recourse, which is where we currently are with the statutory rights. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So, so essentially, like I said, this was a bipartisan effort. You can see the support here, very overwhelming. It just like the voter support that we had here in Pennsylvania. But next slide, please. We're facing a legal challenge. And so, as Jennifer alluded to, the ACLU has challenged Marcy's Law on a technicality in the ballot language, which is why I showed the ballot question itself. So essentially, constitutional victims' rights here in Pennsylvania are on hold, which is really doing a disservice to all victims. How do you have a right without a remedy? How do you uphold one set of individuals' rights, like the accused and convicted, but not give victims their rights, or not give them any right to recourse if their rights are violated? So here in Pennsylvania, we're going through this court process. We're expected to go into Pennsylvania Commonwealth Court this summer. And obviously, the outcome of that will, it will be appealed to the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. So we're looking at least 6, 8, 12 months of legal efforts before Pennsylvanians have constitutional crime victims' rights. So next slide, please. So the way to get involved, you can see here, we have our website, we have our Twitter, and we have Facebook. We encourage anybody who would like to fight for crime victims' rights in any state to log on and join our effort. There's a petition that can be signed. There's different ways to get involved, and we appreciate everybody, and we appreciate the storytellers out there those victims whose rights have been violated. It's important to highlight those stories, just like Jennifer was talking about her compliance office, in order for the judges, the justices that are making the decisions here in Pennsylvania about what are the next steps for Marcy's Law. We need to let them know that this is wanted, this is needed in Pennsylvania and elsewhere. So thank you so much.
Thank you so very much. Folks, I can't tell you, Jennifer, first, thank you so much for the informative information and the opportunities that we have moving forward to help with the advocacy for Marcy's Law for All. So thank you so much for that. To the fantastic group of panelists, Michelle, Jennifer, Leslie, and Jennifer, can't thank you enough again for all that you do, for putting these resources together, and taking the time to discuss all of this important information in such a timely sense. I want to quickly go through, there were a few questions that were popping up, some of them with sort of similar topic. So just really wanted to answer quickly for everyone. You will be able to receive all of the information that was contained in this PowerPoint. They will be emailed to you at the conclusion of this webinar today. You are also able at any time to go to the website, which is the nucenterforleadership.com. You'll be able to view all of the program archives, which will include this program, Identifying Abuse Amid Social Distancing. You'll be able to get the resources. You'll be able to get you'll actually be able to view again the recording of the event today, as well as have information there that you can reach out and contact us as an organization, the Center for Leadership specifically, and we'll be able to get the resources either to you or get you to individuals that may have the resources that you need. I remind everyone, there was one question about continuing education credits for the webinar today. We will be happy to provide to whomever your provider would be for continuing education the information, including the agenda and the slides for the presentation in support of your request for credits. Because it was for multiple states and different types of organizations, we frankly have not been able to reach out to each one of those organizations to get you the credits in advance of today's presentation, but we're happy to work with you to get them retroactively. And again, please feel free to reach out to me directly at the website that we've attached there. A reminder to everyone, we have upcoming webinars every Tuesday and Friday at 10 a.m. Through the Center for Leadership. Feel free to sign up for those. They continue to be free. This Friday is a resume creation and resume updating for those individuals that are looking for resources there as well. I also want to mention, and we will be placing this on the website, One of the comments that was included in the Q&A portion included resourcing concerning the National Crisis Text Line. I wish you all a great day. Be safe, be well, and God bless. Thank you again from Neumann University Center for Leadership.